So we're really proud and excited to have Cyrus here for our first annual event of its kind. This is a long time in coming. As the disability coordinator here at SPU, I've had a lot of conversations hidden behind the doors of my office, and a lot of students here tonight that are wanting to have this conversation more openly. So I'm so glad to see so many of you here, and we're in for a great treat. Cyrus, at just the age of 8, he lost his eyesight due to cancer. But nonetheless, he went on to become a black belt karate, a jazz pianist, a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, an editor of the Law Review at Yale, and an attorney at a prestigious Seattle law firm. At just 33 years old, he is now Washington State's first blind lawmaker in more than 50 years. His life story is in many ways reflected in the policies he's now advocating for. He's a great example of how he did not allow his disability to become a limitation or a boundary. It is with great excitement that we have the privilege of hearing from Mr. Habib tonight. And at the conclusion of his talk, we will have a time for Q&A. We'll have a podium and a mic, so please come up to that podium to ask your questions of Cyrus. Please welcome Mr. Cyrus Habib.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's so good to be here with you. Thank you for the tremendous honor of being able to speak to you at your first annual disability, No Limits, No Boundaries conference. I can't promise a speech that will be remembered for years and years to come, but I can tell you it's going to be better than this speech has been in previous years, okay? The only promise I can make. But no, it is truly such an immense honor to have this chance to talk to you all. And I do hope this is just the beginning. I know we're going to do Q&A tonight, but I hope that we can continue this discussion. I'm right here in town, so I want to be a resource and a friend to the university and to you all as you discuss these things and build what I hope will be a lasting culture of support for people of all abilities and disabilities. I want to, rather than focus on my entire life story, which sometimes I do at speeches like this, I want to leave as much time for Q&A. So I'm just going to tell you a few episodes from my life that maybe we can use as a frame to understand me and my relationship with having a disability. I think it's kind of helpful to understand my background. My parents came to the United States in the 70s from Iran. My dad came to go to the University of Washington in 1970. My mom came later in the decade to go to law school at the University of Maryland. And I was born in Baltimore. And I considered myself lucky to have been born in Baltimore, which is not something you hear all that often, especially these days. But I'll tell you, I was lucky because having been diagnosed with retinoblastoma, which is a rare form of childhood cancer of the eye, I was able to get some amazing medical attention at Johns Hopkins. And they were able to save my life, but unfortunately not able to save my eyesight. And so I became completely blind at age 8 after my second bout with cancer. And, you know, I often like to joke that that was in 1989 when I lost my eyesight. So all 8 years that I was able to see took place in the 1980s, meaning all my visual memories are still from the 1980s, which means like everyone in this room still looks like Boy George and Cyndi Lauper from some MTV throwback. My family moved here to the Seattle area shortly after that happened, and the first episode I want to tell you about took place shortly after that. I was in 3rd grade at Somerset Elementary School in Bellevue, and the kids, in every elementary school, kids like to go out at recess time and play on the jungle gym and the monkey bars and the weird playground equipment. And so my school was no different. All the kids would go out, rain or shine, and play in the playground. And I think knowing that I had just become blind, and probably more importantly, knowing that my mom is a lawyer and a litigator, even worse. The school was not thrilled about me playing with the other kids on the jungle gym 5 feet off the ground. So they kept me by the side of the school. They kept me with the recess ladies, the recess monitors, I think is the more politically correct term, by the side of the school while the other kids were playing. And so, anyone who knows about having a disability or having fought, a disease like cancer or something, or even something as simple as moving across the country, let alone all three of those combined, can understand how isolating it was day after day to be denied that access to my peers and to just simple recreation. So I went home, I told my parents what had happened. My parents were as indignant as I was, and my mom took me with her to the school the next day so that I could learn how to become an advocate for myself. And I'll never forget this, she went to the school and she went to the principal and she said, I'm gonna teach my son, I'm gonna take him to your school on the weekends, I'm gonna teach him how to get around the playground, I'm gonna teach him how to get around the jungle gym, he's gonna learn it as well as any other kid knows it. She said, it may happen that he may slip and fall. And it may even happen that he may slip and fall and break an arm. That's a fear that any mother has. And then she said, I can fix a broken arm, I can never fix a broken spirit. That was the first and central lesson for me of how I was to proceed. This was just a few months after I became blind. And you heard Ali talk about this, and you heard, and by the way, I just want to say, nothing I'm able to say is as poetic as what we heard from Garrett and Ali and Amanda. Can we give them one more round of applause? I think, but you heard them describe that. You heard them describe how this gets at the very spirit. And so the first lesson that I learned was that as strong as the urge is to protect and to shield, and this is a Christian university, so there's a very, very compassionate Christian desire to protect and to save and to nurture, but that taken too far, that ultimately can rob us of our own humanity, our own need to go out and take risks and maybe even break an arm, just like any other kid. That's part of being human. It's part of being human to experience the friction of life. And so, I remember a couple of years after that, it was all the kids were going to ski school. They were going up to Ski Acres and Snoqualmie and on the weekends. And so I wanted to do that. My dad wanted me to do that, and so we had to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? So he signed up to be a chaperone for all the kids so that I wouldn't feel bad that my dad was coming with me. So we went up to the slopes, and we'd take the ski lift up, and he'd describe the slope that we were about to ski. And then he'd ski like 15, 20 feet behind me and just yell out, left, right, cliff. And which is a lot like politics. People yelling at you, left, right, cliff, pretty much sums up what's happening in DC and Olympia. But it was, those things are scary for a parent. It was scary for them to send me to New York City at age 18 to go to college and take the subway on my own, or for me to go to Guatemala on my own to go learn Spanish. Those things are frightening, and I know that as their only child, I know that I was definitely a source of stress for them. But I also know that they understood how important it was that I get up on the playground, get out on the playground of life, get up on the jungle gym of life, and take those risks. Second episode in my development comes years later. And I did say on Twitter, I think I tweeted back at Seattle Pacific University's Twitter account and said that I might overshare tonight if I like the audience. So I'm going to overshare just a little bit. It's not too much, don't get worried. So I was in grad school. I was over in England going to grad school, and I'd really taken this lesson of the playground to heart by this point, right? And I was really of the school of thought that I had to just assimilate as much as possible. and that it was so important to get on the playground that like I actually didn't want people to even know that I was blind. Like that story that Ali mentioned about like people not knowing that she's blind, like I would have loved that, you know, because I was just so eager to fit in. And for it to be like a non-issue. And so I remember one night we're in grad school and we're at a pub. Oxford's not a dry campus, by the way. So we're at a pub and we're having some drinks, and these girls come over and they're talking to us, and I can tell that this girl who's talking to me like does not know that I'm blind, right? Like she's saying things like, oh, like, look at that guy, or, she's just kind of saying things. And I'm like, I'm not saying any, I'm not letting her know either, right? So then she says something like, oh, so I just have to ask you, like, why are you wearing sunglasses inside? Do you think you're some kind of American hotshot or something like that? And I'm not going to do the British accent, but she says something like, you think, and I was just at this moment, and I just said something like, well, I just part of my outfit or whatever. So, in any case, they left, and whatever. The night went on, and my friend who was with me said, why didn't you just say you're blind? Why didn't you just let her know? What's the big deal? And I said, well, I just figured that that would kind of kill the attraction. That would like kill the moment. If I said that. And he said, I'm going to tell you about a book that's going to completely change your life, okay? It's not the Bible, but it's another book that'll change your life. It's called The Ant and the Peacock. It's by a British anthropologist named Helena Cronin. And what the book describes is two creatures. Any guesses? The ant and the peacock. And how they have confounded, and I don't feel bad about this is a university, so I'm going to go a little like scholastic here. They both have confounded evolutionary biologists for over 100 years because they can't, even Darwin could not figure out the aspects, the two very specific aspects of these creatures, respectively. For the ant, altruism, which I don't have time to get into right now, but it's a whole other discussion. And for the peacock, the idea of beauty, which is a disability for the peacock, right? Because so it turns out when peahens find peacocks with whom to make pea babies, they actually are looking for the more beautiful, brilliant plumage, right? Like beautiful, brilliant, multicolored feathers that, and whereas in nature, obviously, that would be, the whole name of the game when you're in the state of nature is camouflage, right? You're not trying to stand out, unless you're at the head of the food chain. So they couldn't understand why doesn't she go for the camouflage one so her babies will be safer? Well, it turns out that this is her theory, okay, but I choose to believe in it, as the amateur anthropologist that I am. But that there is something about resilience. There's something about having a no limits, no boundaries approach to life, of overcoming, of living to a certain, frankly, living to a certain age, despite the disability in nature, is itself a trait that is sexually selected for by the peahen. And he was absolutely right, because, and what he said was, my friend said, this is the point. You need to not be ashamed that you're a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford but that you're blind, but you should be proud that you are and that you're blind, and that's gonna be the source of attraction, not just for women, but for employers, for law schools, for anybody. I mean, maybe even for you guys as you thought about who to invite here tonight, right? So it's not something to be ashamed of. It can be a source of pride because people look at you and say, okay, you've managed to do these things. All right, so that's the second kind of episode, right? So I went from one extreme to another extreme, and then trying to modulate to get to some sort of more productive understanding of what it means to have a disability. which gets me to, and I'll just very briefly describe my first which gets me to advocacy, because it wasn't until I became an advocate, which then laid the groundwork for me running for the legislature, that I really truly understood what tremendous power we have as people who care about this. So I was in law school, my first year of law school. Wireless was like brand new then that year, and so all the kids would sit in law school in class and like G-chat and be on Facebook and whatever while class was going on. And so I was, and I have software on my computer that reads what's on the screen. And so I had I had one little earbud in, and I'm listening to whatever it was I was listening to. And I went to the New York Times website while I'm in a class called Civil Procedures. It's so boring. And I decided I'm going to go to the New York Times website to just see what's in the news. And so I find this article about a lawsuit that's being brought by the American Council of the Blind against the U.S. Treasury Department, alleging that U.S. currency, the bills that we use, $5 bills, $10 bills, $20 bills, are discriminatory because they cannot be denominated, they can't be distinguished by blind and low vision Americans, and they are a public service, they are public good. And this really resonated with me because I just moved back from England where, as in every other industrialized country, bills are distinguishable. So I was really fascinated. I went to the law school dean and I said, I really want to get involved with this in some way. And he helped me get involved. I went and found what's called a friend of the court. I found like an uninvolved party and decided to represent them and write a brief. And the point that I made was, this is how I became an advocate, was what I stumbled upon was this idea that, okay, I think we all understand that it's not fair if I go to Starbucks, for example, and I'm not picking on Starbucks, just using it as an example. If I go to Starbucks and I buy a cup of coffee and I give them a $20 bill and they give me back as change 4 pieces of paper, right? Then I'm hoping that those 4 bills are 3 5s and a 1, but I don't know it, right? So I think that the blind consumer is something that was kind of the point of this lawsuit. But what I realized was that, you know what's even more pernicious than the blind consumer being shut out? What about the person on the other side of the cash register? What about the fact that nearly all entry-level jobs in this country require the ability to tell one bill from another, to be able to make change? And that all those jobs were being blocked off to people who are blind and low vision. And if you block off entry-level jobs, you make it that much harder for someone to get their next job. And that might explain why in 2007, this is before the downturn, there was a 70% unemployment rate among blind and low vision Americans of working age. 70%, that's before the downturn. So that was the argument that I made. We were very fortunate that it won over. It had the added benefit of being an argument that a conservative judge would like, because it was all about, hey, let's get people to work, right? Rather than like staying at home on Social Security. Like this way they can go out and work, they want to work. And you know what? We did get a conservative vote on the bench that we needed, and we won that case in federal appellate court. And I went to Congress, and I'll just say this as an aside, that then you'll wonder why this has not yet happened. And that's because there's politicians in the world. And I teach a whole class on this, but I'll just say I went to Congress and the whole debate was about, well, how can we change the currency? The vending machine lobby of all people showed up in opposition to changing currency. And the best proposal I heard was, well, why don't we just cut different numbers of corners off the bills so that we can know without changing the shape of the bills? Which I just love, because I love Congress being honest about cutting corners. So these 3 episodes, I just wanted to say, this is kind of how I came to my No Limits, No Boundaries understanding, which is, first, it's important to have the opportunity to go out there and take risks and not be over-sheltered and locked, or kept by the side of the school. It's important to, in trying to fit in, not turn away from a very critical aspect of one's identity in hopes that it'll just go away. And then once you balance those two, which is, it took me, 26, 7, 28 years at that point. But once you do that, then how do you take that understanding and allow it and in such a way that you're allowed to go out and make the world a better place for other people, either with that same disability or with different abilities or disabilities. And they could be very small things like changing currency, a little pocket of injustice, or they could be bigger things like making sure that we have transit so that that's adequate so that people can get to and from work if they have a disability. Making sure that we have schools with small enough classes that teachers can teach kids with all different sorts of needs without having them pulled out and taken into a different room. Making sure that access to technology is there so that when a person wants to start their own business or go work somewhere, they can get the adaptive technology they need. And what I want to close on is that as you do these things, as we do these things, we make that move from a kind of personal reconciliation of what it means to live with various abilities and disabilities to the more public service and public-minded and mission-oriented work that you all are going to do, I'm positive, here on campus and out in the community. I would say the most important thing to keep at the center of what you do is tremendous gratitude, which has taken me so long to cultivate myself. I'm an only child and a Leo. And, you know, I was born in the year of the rooster, and gratitude and humility were not the first virtues that came to me. But here's the thing, okay? The easiest thing in the world for me to do would be to stand up here and tell you guys, you know, after that nice introduction, you know what? I did do all those things. I did win a Rhodes Scholarship. I did go to Yale. I did all those things. I am a state senator. And you know what? I did them all on my own. Did them all on my own. And that made me feel great. And I think there's a ton of my colleagues in the legislature and in politics, I won't mention which party, but there are some who will say people ought to be able to do it themselves. This is, you know, it was, after all, it was the Declaration of Independence. Well, I think a more true name for it would have been the Declaration of Interdependence. Because I know that as easy as it would be for me to stand up here and tell you that I did it all on my own, the only problem is I know it's not true. I knew if it weren't for the Department of Services for the Blind teaching me how to use a cane, I think that means I'm out of time. But if it weren't for that, then I wouldn't have learned how to use a cane. If it weren't for the State School for the Blind where I used to go down and get trained on software, I wouldn't be able to use my computer. And if it weren't for the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, I would have never learned to read. If it weren't for teachers in public schools, I would have never been able to go from Braille to Yale. So I have tremendous gratitude, and if we do that, if we put that at the center of our work, if we remember, as the sign on I-5 says that I love so much, it says, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic, that we are all beneficiaries of tremendous work that's been done by others, then we can pay it forward to others. So I want to leave you with that. As you take tonight as the beginning of this mission, let's take disability awareness and turn it into disability action. I want to be with you as you do all of that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to answer your questions.